SQL Server 2008 SharePoint integration. Microsoft SharePoint is a great tool to allow members of a team to collaborate. For example, they can share documents, and one of the things that we want to talk about here is sharing reports, allowing users to view them and integrate them into existing websites as a web part. In this nugget, we're just going to talk about how to set up your SharePoint integration so you can deploy reports to SharePoint. And then in the next nugget, we'll talk about how to consume those reports from the other direction. So what we're going to do first of all is simply install SharePoint and set up our simple web farm. This one is just going to have one node. We're also going to set up our reporting services database to account for SharePoint as opposed to just having it run in native mode. Once we set up our basic SharePoint, then we can go to the central administration, install the reporting services add-in, and then deploy a report. We're going to be creating that report within the Business Intelligence Development Studio and then deploy it to your SharePoint site. Before you get started on this, you're going to have to download two files. One of them is for SharePoint itself, so I'm going to take you right here. If you take a look at, if you just do a quick Google search on Microsoft SharePoint download, this is where, just follow the first link there, and it will take you to the download page, and you just follow the instructions there. The second download is the Reporting Services SharePoint add-in, and once again you can go to Google and just type in Reporting Services 2008 SharePoint add-in, and it takes you there. Okay, so you'll take the time to download those two pieces of software. It will probably take you about 15 minutes, and then we can get started with our installation. A couple of the prerequisites for SharePoint integration is one, you have IIS installed. The other prerequisite is that you have the .NET framework installed on your machine. Well, if you're running on Windows Server 2003 or later, most likely you have those already installed and configured. If not, then go to Microsoft's website and do whatever is necessary to make sure those are installed. You'll want to go to your control panel, go to Administrative Tools, and then look for your IIS administration. Okay, so what you see right here is my control panel, and what we're interested in is the Internet Information Services Manager. So you can just double click on that. We're just making sure that we have this up and running first of all, and you'll see that under IIS right down here there's authentication. If you double click on there, make sure that you have basic authentication, ASP.NET impersonation. You can even have anonymous authentication enabled, but these two are the important ones. Make sure that they're enabled. And under here you'll see sites. So out of the box there's the default website. I happen to have this VMware management website because I was playing around with some other tools, so you probably just have the default website. What we're going to do is install our SharePoint integration. So once we perform that installation, then you will have a SharePoint website. In addition to that, we're going to have a website that's dedicated to our reports that are integrating in with SharePoint. So our end result will have two additional sites in here. The two pieces of software that you want to download from Microsoft's website are the SharePoint Services download as well as the Report Server SharePoint add-in. So once again, both of these are .msi files, and they are both downloadable from their website if you just do a quick search. Since these are both .msi files, you'll need to have your Windows installer services up and running. Let me show you what I mean. If we go to our control panel, and I'm looking under Administrative Tools and then Services, right here, I'm going to scroll down here until I find the Windows installer right here. So it looks like mine is already up and running, so that looks good. So that first download for SharePoint, installing that, go ahead and double click on it and it should launch this wizard that you see here in a moment. It's almost ready here, and just go ahead and accept the terms of the agreement. And I'm going to do the advanced installation. And what I want to do here is install the web front end. This will allow SharePoint to communicate with my report server. And then we'll say install now. This might take a few minutes. Looks like we're about halfway done here. It's applying some updates right now. It should be just a moment. And now it's finished installing. So you'll see that this checkboxes here run the SharePoint Products and Technologies Configuration Wizard. So go ahead and make sure that's checked and hit close. And you're going to need to know the name of the database server and the database server farm configuration, as well as username and password for database access. So we'll just go through this wizard here. And this is just a warning saying that the following services may have to be started or reset during configuration. We'll just hit yes. And we're actually going to create a new server farm because we don't have any nodes in a farm anyway. We don't have any collection of nodes. We're starting from scratch. So our database server, in other words, the name or the IP address of the machine that is going to be hosting our database. In my case, it's Julie1. You can call yours localhost if everything is running on the same machine, or you can put the IP address of that machine. The database name, you can change this if you want to. Once we go through this wizard, then you'll be able to go to your SQL Server Intelligence Studio. You'll be able to actually look at this database that's been created for you. As far as the database access account, this will be the domain / username. So my domain is Julie1, my username is Julie, and here is my password. And then I hit next. Now, if you get an error that looks like this, it's saying, hey, can't find the database, or it doesn't have the service up and running, what you can do is actually go into your control panel, your services, and I'm just going to go up to where my SQL Server services are, and this is what my problem is. My SQL Server is not up and running, so I'll double click on that, and I will also go ahead and start the agent as well as the reporting service. So give this a minute to start. Here is the agent. Okay, so now that we've got that going, I'll just minimize that window and let's try this again. Okay, it gets us to this page right here. For the port number, it's pretty much a random 5-digit number. You can override this if you want to, or you can stick with the default. I'm going to just do 5s across the board because it's easy to remember. And as far as authentication, I'll do NTLM. We'll hit next. So this is just a synopsis of my settings here. The central administration URL is going to be julie1:55555, and there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next on here, and this will perform about 9 tasks. So once again, be patient. Okay, almost done. We have 7 of 9 tasks finished. And here we go. It's just finalizing the installation, and in just a moment we'll be able to do a little bit of configuration. And there we go. So we'll just click Finish right there. And this web page right here is the administration site. And notice the URL up here. I have the host name and the port number that I specified. Now, if you're getting a blank page like I am, what that means is under your authentication, you probably don't have basic authentication enabled. And so what you can do is go to your IIS management, which is right here. And I'm just going to click on Sites right here. And we'll just right-click on here and refresh the view. So you should now see this SharePoint Central Admin site right here. If you then double-click here on Authentication, you'll see that basic authentication was disabled. Let's enable it. And now we can minimize this and refresh our page. And now it's asking you for the credentials. So once again, username is, well, it's the domain / username. So Julie1 / Julie, and then the password. I'm going to go ahead and have it remember the password for me. And then you'll see the admin site. This might take a few seconds for it to load the first time. Okay, and here we are on the main page. So you might want to click on this first link, the README page. You always read that first, right? And then from here you can configure your incoming and outgoing email settings. You can also create a SharePoint site. You can configure your workflow settings, diagnostic logging settings, antivirus protection, and so on. Now, as I mentioned, there's a second piece of software that you'll want to download and install, and that's the RS SharePoint add-on. Okay, so once you download that, then you can launch it by double-clicking on that file. So let me bring that over here. You'll see here, RS SharePoint. Double-click on that, and we'll hit Run. Once again, make sure your Windows installer is up and running. And we'll go ahead and hit Next here, accept the terms in the license agreement, and you can stick with the defaults there, and let's just hit Install. This doesn't take nearly as long as the previous installation. Okay, it's copying the new files, almost finished here. And we're just about finished here, so it'll just take a minute to remove the backup files. And now it's finished, so we can just hit that button right there. And what you can do now is under Site Actions right here, you can go to Site Settings, and you'll see here that we have Site Collection Features. Let's click on that, and we have Report Server Integration feature. We want to activate that, and in a moment we're going to create a site for the reports as well and activate the integration there as well. Now in our next step here, we want to go to our Reporting Services Configuration Management, so you can just launch it just like this, and it will give you the login page. Here's my server name that it's running on, and I'm going to connect, and I'll move this over here so you can see the whole thing. And what you're looking at here, there's several different things you can configure, but if you click on Database right here, this tells us which database is hosting our report server, and you'll see that right now I have the database called Report Server 5, which is running in native mode. We don't want that. We actually want to use the integrated SharePoint integrated mode. So we're just going to select a new database and make it run in integrated mode. So create a new report server database, and we'll go ahead and test that connection to the server. That looks good. We'll hit Next. And we'll just call this Report Server and say SharePoint Integrated Mode, like that. As far as the authentication type, you can stick with Windows credentials. So in here I'll have the domain name and then the user and then the password. And then hit Next. There's a synopsis, and we'll hit Next, and it just takes a couple seconds here for it to configure. And then we hit Finish. If we go to the Report Manager URL right here, you'll see that this is residing on port 80. If you're using HTTPS secure, then it's on 443. Let's focus on this first one right here. Port 80 is default, so when we try to access this in a web browser, we don't even have to specify port 80. We can just say http://julie1/reports. Let's also look at our web service URL up here. You'll see that this is running on port 80. Now I want to emphasize that if it was running on anything besides port 80, then you would have to explicitly mention that port number in the URL. Okay, so take a note of this report URL right down there. And if you want to test this, you can just go to your browser and you can type in the URL there, the hostname/report server, and there it is. We didn't get an error. That's actually our report server. So that's looking good. At this point, if we want to go to our IIS manager, you can just pull this up real quickly, and you can see that yes, here is SharePoint. And if you take a look on the right-hand side, here we have the port number explicitly mentioned. That's for the SharePoint Central Admin. And as I mentioned, you can always go to the authentication and make whatever modifications you want to there. At this point, we can go to our SharePoint Central Admin site and create a new web application from there. So let me just move this guy out of the way, and this one as well. And I'm just going to bring this browser over here, and we can go here. This is the Central Administration, and under Application Management, I'm going to say Create or Extend Web Application. I'm going to click on Create a New Web Application, And it's okay if you get this little warning right here. I'm going to make mine run on port 83, so I'm going to change this naming here a little bit. And you'll see over here, I'm going to change that as well. And for authentication, make sure I change that as well. For authentication, we'll do NTLM. No, we will not allow anonymous, and we're not going to use SSL. Let's not worry about load balance URL right now. Don't mess with the application pool either. I want you to scroll down until you see the database name and authentication area. So here's where the database server is, and the database name, really you can call this anything. It's actually going to create a SQL Server database for you corresponding to this. So just stick with the naming conventions. I'll put WSS content 83 since we're running on port 83. As far as this application pool right here, we're going to make this configurable. We're going to make this the domain name, followed by the username. This has to be an administrator. And then I'll put in the password. And then we'll scroll down a little bit. For the database authentication, we can do Windows authentication, which is recommended, or if you want to do SQL authentication, just make sure you put in the proper account and password information in there. And then we'll hit OK. So this will just take a couple seconds to create. And eventually you'll get to this page that says that your application was created. And you'll see on this page here that we need to run the IIS reset with the no force option. So just open up a DOS prompt. And I'm just going to do that right here. It really doesn't matter which directory you're in as long as the path is set correctly. And this will just reset your IIS services. And everything's been restarted now, so I'll get that out of the way. And then we're going to create a site collection page. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is our web application. You'll see we have this drop down, and that's the only choice right now. And here we'll just say reporting services test. You can put an optional description in there if you want to. You can even provide a subpath here on the URL. For example, you can say /sites and so on. I'm just going to leave it just like it is. And then for collaboration, I'll just stick with team site. And the primary site collection administrator is going to be Julie. It's assuming the Julie1 domain. And we hit OK. If there's any issues with the username, it will tell you that the user doesn't exist and so on. Okay, so you should get to this point right here, and it tells us that the top level site was successfully created. And you'll see here that it's the host name, and the port that we specified. If you click on that, it will take you to that page. Now, just like before, if you get a blank page in here, it probably means that your IIS settings are incorrect. You need to have basic authentication enabled. So if this is the case, then open up your IIS management. And you'll drill down. I'm going to go to Sites, and under View here, I will refresh this. Here we go. Here's SharePoint 83. Drill down here, double-click on Authentication. And my basic authentication needs to be enabled. I'll move that out of the way, and then I'll refresh this page. It's now prompted me for my username and password. And I'll tell it to remember my password. Now you see it's chugging and plugging, and eventually it will launch the page. On this page, you'll see here it says Reporting Services Test right up here. And we want to go to the Site Actions and go to our Site Settings. Under here, you'll see Site Collection Features, so you click on that, and we want to activate the Report Server Integration feature. So now that it's active, it's a good thing. At this point, if you want to do a little bit more testing, you can. I'm going to go to my Julie1/report server. And you'll see that we have this link right here. It's directory, which is that site that we just created. So if you click on that, and here is shared documents, which is a directory. Now let's go back to our central administration. You can actually get there by directly typing in the URL, or you can go to your control panel, administrative tools, and you'll see the launch bar there as well. I'm going to do this right here. I just happen to remember that it's port 55555. Here we have our central admin. We can go to our application management, and you'll see that under reporting services we have this section now. We have this because we installed the reporting services add-in with SharePoint. Okay, so under integration settings, let's click on that. And here is where we put in the report server web service URL. So that is the URL that you get from here. I can explicitly put in port 80, or if I leave it blank, it defaults to 80. We get this URL from the report server configuration management. The authentication mode, you can either do trusted account or Windows authentication. Depends on whether you're using Kerberos or not. I'm just going to say Windows authentication, and then I'll hit OK. The next thing you can do is under Grant Database Access. You specify right here the server name of the database and whether it's a default or a named instance. I'm using the default instance, so I'll just say OK right there. That warning message in red there is just fine. Okay, so enter a username and password for retrieving reporting services service accounts for Julie 1. So here we'll put in the domain name followed by the user, and then we hit OK. This next part, we can say set server defaults. And here we have where you can specify your settings for the report history, things like that. Okay, so just know that these are configurable if you want. For example, here, enable Windows integrated security for report data sources, so we don't have to provide credentials. And we can also enable ad hoc report executions. We can even provide a custom report builder launch URL if we want to. So it's just good to know that these settings are here. I'm just going to hit OK. The next thing we do is create a document library to hold our reports. So we want to go to the area where we actually created, here we go, our second site here, our reporting services test site. And under Site Actions, I just want you to say Create. And now you'll click on Document Library. And for the document library right here, let's just call this Reports. You can give it an optional description if you want to. We're not going to mess with any template, so just say None for there, and just hit Create. At this point, you'll see on the left-hand side that we have reports that we just created. It's a quick link. At this point, if we want to create a report, we can just open up our Business Intelligence Development Studio, and we'll just go through the wizard to create that. So I'm just going to go to File, New, Project, and we're going to do the Report Server Project Wizard. So just double-click on that. You can just stick with the default name if you want to. And we'll just step through this wizard. So our data source, you can just stick with the default name for the data source. And this is a SQL Server connection, so we can click on Edit. And of course, my database is running on the Julie 1 server. And here's our database names, or our choices here. I'm going to choose AdventureWorks DW 2008. And then I'll test the connection. Looks great. I'll hit OK. So now I hit Next. And here's my query builder. So let's just right-click on here and add a table. Let's just do a quick little report, basic report on the customers. So here's our customer table. We're going to grab the customer key, as well as the first name, last name, birth date, gender, and email address. And let's do an order by. Order by last name and first name. Hit OK. And now we'll hit OK again. Let's do a tabular report. I'm just going to put all the available fields as the details. If you wanted to make yours a little bit different, that's fine. Our goal here is just to get a basic report on SharePoint. Okay, so I'm going to stick with the slate look and feel. And here is where I need to make a modification here. The report server, instead of saying localhost, I'm going to say Julie1:83. And let's just get rid of that report server right there. So that's the report server right there, and then we'll just copy this, paste it right here, and we're going to tack on reports. So that's the deployment folder. Okay, so now we hit next, and our report name, let's call this customer report 1, and we can even preview the report. It's getting generated here. Eventually we'll see it. And this is our report right down here. So looks like all the stuff is in order. Looks great. Now the next thing we want to do before we deploy this, we want to right-click on this project right here, go to Properties, and you'll see here that these are the settings that we just configured. We want to copy this right here, and for the target data source folder, we're going to make that be the same as our target report folder. We hit OK right there, and at this point I can just right-click on my report. I can perform a build to make sure that everything looks syntactically okay. Looks like it succeeded. Now I can right-click on this again and deploy it. Give it a second or two. It really depends on how large the report is. Could take a minute or two. But eventually you'll see the URL appear down here. You'll be prompted for the credentials. So here I have Julie1/Julie and my password. And then I hit OK. So there we go. Told us to deploy the report right down there. In fact, if I wanted to copy that and then paste that into a URL, I would be able to view the report. So that is how you deploy reports to SharePoint. In our next nugget, I'll show you how to consume the reports going the other direction. So we'll be working again with SharePoint. Let's review what we learned in this nugget. Remember, in order for you to have your SQL Server communicate with SharePoint, you're going to have to install a couple pieces of software. The first one is the SharePoint services itself. When you install that, you're going to have to either perform a web farm installation or a standalone. In our case, we did a web farm with one node. And then you're also going to install the reporting services add-on to integrate in with SharePoint. You're going to have a reporting services database that's going to have to run in SharePoint integrated mode as opposed to the native mode. So remember to configure that. You're going to go to your reporting services configuration tool and make sure that your database is set up properly. You'll also have to make sure that your credentialing is appropriate. In our case, we did Windows credentials, specifying the domain name, the username, and the appropriate password. Once you have your SharePoint integration set up, you're going to set up a SharePoint web application that stores your reports. So make sure that you configure your collection settings to turn on or activate SharePoint integration. You'll also need to set up the database credentialing, and that's done through the administrative website. At any point, if you want to get into your SharePoint Central Administration, remember you can go into your Control Panel, Administrative Tools, and you'll see the icon there to start it up. It is a web application itself. After you've set up your appropriate websites, then you can go ahead and create your reports. The easiest way to do that is to go to your Visual Studio, Business Intelligence Development Studio, create whatever report you want to. Make sure you look at the properties for that project to make sure you're deploying to the appropriate location. Once you do that, you can build and deploy your report to your web application, your SharePoint application. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.